Hey guys, tonight we slip into the low doorway of a smoke-dark cottage where the air is thick with the sour edge of boiled grain, and your stomach is already beginning to argue with the day ahead. There's no roasted meat turning over a fire here, no baskets of fresh bread still warm from the oven, just a dented iron pot hanging over embers that have been coaxed back to life since before the first light broke. You're about to discover what it really meant to eat when you were a medieval peasant. And trust me, you probably won't survive this menu without a fight. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you, because in this world time is measured not by the clock, but by the hours between bowls. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you taste each day is pottage if you're lucky. It's not a dish so much as an ongoing project simmering for days, fed with whatever you've been able to scavenge or save. Yesterday's barley water thickened with leeks, a handful of beans from last summer's harvest, maybe a shred of salted pork, if fortune smiled. You stir it slowly the way your mother did, knowing the flavors of survival don't need to be rushed. The wooden spoon is worn to the shape of all the hands that have kept you alive, and the smell smoke earth, and the faint ghost of meat feels like the only warmth you own. Bread is your other constant companion, though it's rarely the soft, pale loaf you might imagine. This is rye bread, heavy, sour, and dark, its crust like armor, its crumb dense enough to make your jaw ache. Sometimes the grain carries little black specks, ergot fungus, though you don't call it that. You just know it's the kind of bread that can send people raving into the night, or make their skin burn, as if the devil himself touched them. But hunger is not polite enough to wait for perfect loaves, so you eat anyway. Meals are measured by what the Lord allows you to keep. Your own grain passes through his mill first, where the toll is taken enough to feed his family, his servants, and his ambitions, before you ever see the flour. You curse him under your breath, the way everyone does, but not loud enough for it to cost you more than you can afford. Then there's the bakehouse, where you might trade coin or labor to use the communal oven. Your loaves are marked with a slash, so you can find them later among dozens, hoping no one takes yours by mistake. Fresh vegetables come only when the seasons decide. In spring, there's the hungry gap when the winter stores are gone, but the gardens haven't yet offered anything worth eating. You learn to survive on nettles, sorrel, and whatever stubborn roots the frost left behind. Summer gives berries and greens, but also takes every spare hour for field work. Autumn is the only season that feels generous when you store cabbages in pits, braid onions, and salt down strips of pork. Winter turns every meal into a calculation: how long can this piece of bread last? How much thinner can we stretch the pottage without losing the will to eat it? Fish might appear on your table, but only if you're close to water or can afford it salted. Meat is rare enough to be remembered weeks later, its flavor lingering like a half-forgotten dream. Most days your body runs on bread, pottage, and ale, not because ale is a treat, but because the water could make you sick. Small ale, weak and cloudy, is brewed in your own home, and you drink it like medicine against thirst. Hunger shapes everything. You learn where to find hazelnuts in the hedgerow, when to gather mushrooms that won't kill you, how to trade a day's labor for a jug of cider at harvest. You keep favors stored the way you keep onions in a cool, dark place to be brought out only when truly needed. And you pray sometimes to God, sometimes to luck, that the weather spares your fields, because one bad year means the kind of hunger that gnaws bone as easily as it gnaws bread. Tonight, as the pot simmers and the bread rests under its cloth, you measure your fortune by the fact that there is something to eat at all. It may be thin, it may be sour, it may be the same thing you ate yesterday and will eat tomorrow, but it is survival, and in your world that is enough. The morning is a thin light filtering through the smoke hole, the air still damp with the smell of yesterday's fire. You move quietly, not out of peace, but out of habit. Noise wastes breath, and every breath belongs to the work ahead. The embers in the hearth are barely alive, hidden under their blanket of ash, and you coax them awake with dry twigs. A lick of flame answers, not eager, but willing enough. Your day begins the way every day begins, with the pot. Pottage is never really finished. It is a living thing fed daily and never entirely emptied. Today's breakfast is yesterday's supper, yesterday's breakfast, and the leftovers from the day before that. You give it a stir, feeling the spoon drag through thick barley near the bottom, the surface broth barely hiding, floating strands of cabbage and a lone slice of onion. The flavors don't surprise you anymore. They're not meant to. They simply exist the way breathing exists. Bread waits for you, but it's not the kind you can tear apart without effort. The loaf is heavy in your hands, dark with rye, its crust thick enough to resist the knife. The sourness greets you before the taste does, reminding you that this bread will not pretend to be anything else. You tear a wedge and rub it along the inside of the bowl, chasing every drop of broth. Nothing is wasted. If it's a milling day, the sack of grain is heavier than you wish, and the path to the Lord's mill is muddy from last week's rain. The mill wheel turns with a slow, complaining creak, and the miller greets you with a face that already knows how much he'll take. His toll is constant, a scoop from your sack measured in his favor, and there's no arguing. You've seen what happens to those who try. You tell yourself it's just the way of things. On baking days, the village gathers at the communal oven loaves, proofing under linen cloths, each marked with a unique slash or symbol, so they won't be accidentally swapped. The oven is a yawning mouth, swallowing the day's bread in exchange for coins or favors. The heat rolls out and wraps around you like a second skin, and for a moment you forget the hunger that will return as soon as the bread begins to cool. When the calendar calls for fasting, meat disappears from your meals entirely, though it's rare enough to begin with. Fish takes its place if you can afford it, fresh from a stream or salted until it's more salt than fish. The salt itself is precious, traded like treasure, worth as much in bargaining as it is in flavor. You make do with peas, beans, onions, and leeks, stretching flavors with whatever herbs the garden still offers. A handful of parsley, a sprig of sage, small green mercies that can trick the tongue into believing the meal is richer than it is. The garden is not for beauty. It is survival laid out in rows, squat cabbages, leeks with dirt still clinging to their roots, beans climbing crooked poles. You work it in silence, feeling the soil in your nails, the ache in your back. The knowledge that without these green soldiers standing in their patch winter will be meaner than it already plans to be. In the evenings you brew small ale, not for celebration, but because water is a risk you cannot take. It's weak, cloudy, and far from the monastery brews you've heard of, but it keeps you from sickness. You drink it without ceremony, and so does everyone else. Some nights the village gathers at harvest for a saint's day, or when a marriage has been made. You bring what you can, a loaf, a handful of dried apples, a sliver of cheese. You share it, because one day you'll need someone else to share with you. That's the unspoken law here. Charity and survival are the same word, just spoken in different seasons. Still, the shadow of scarcity is never far. A single summer of too much rain or too little can tip the balance from thin meals into true hunger. You learn to read the signs, the miller's sacks staying full too long, the Lord's storerooms locked more tightly than usual. You store what you can trade, what you must, and pray that this winter will be only the usual kind of hard. As night falls, you measure the day's survival not by fullness, but by the fact that you're still here. The pot is left on the hearth again, tomorrow's breakfast, already waiting in the dim glow of the embers. Hunger is patient. So are you. By the time the first frost clings to the grass in the morning, your thoughts have already turned to the stores hidden away for the lean months ahead. You open the small chest where the grain is kept, running your fingers through the cool kernels as though you can measure time by their feel. Each handful is a calculation: how many bowls of pottage it might become, how many loaves, how many days before the bottom is reached. You've learned that in the life of a peasant, the true measure of wealth is not silver coins, but the number of meals between you and hunger. You guard your grain from mice, damp, and desperation. A wooden lid keeps out the first two, but the last is trickier. Neighbors will ask to borrow, promising to repay after the next harvest. You've done the same yourself. These debts are measured not in writing, but in memory, and you can't afford to forget who owes what. A well-timed gift of a sack of oats might save a family and earn you a place at their table if misfortune visits your own. Winter eating is a narrowing of the world. The pottage becomes more predictable, the vegetables fewer. You save the cabbages from the pit one at a time, brushing away frost and straw, trying not to bruise their leaves. You peel onions slowly, breathing in their sharpness, as if it could wake the body on a gray morning. Turnips and parsnips, dug up before the ground, locked hard, sit in the cool dark, like pale lanterns, waiting their turn to be boiled into the pot. There's meat sometimes. The slaughter of the pig in late autumn is both a celebration and a funeral. You watch as every piece is preserved, strips of fat salted, and hung sausages packed tightly and smoked until they are firm as wood. Even the blood is used, thickened with oats, into a pudding that will be sliced thin and fried in a pan, blackened by years of use. It tastes of iron and winter, and you eat it knowing it may be the richest thing you taste for months. Ale remains your daily drink, not because it's pleasurable, but because it's safe. Brewing is a task that fits into the rhythm of the week, malting grain, in the warmth near the hearth, boiling the mash until the air smells of bread and bitterness, cooling it in wooden tubs and storing it in casks small enough to carry. It's weak, cloudy, and turns sour quickly, but for a peasant's body it is life insurance against fever brought by bad water. Salt is a currency all its own. The small cloth bundle you've traded for at market sits like treasure in the cupboard. You ration it with care pinches for preserving meat, heavier handfuls for brining fish, sparing shakes over the pot to coax more flavor from thin ingredients. Without it, food spoils quickly and hunger arrives faster. Some evenings, when the day's work has been done and the cold drives everyone closer to the hearth, you crack hazelnuts gathered in autumn. The sound is sharp in the quiet, and the small sweetness of the nut meat feels almost like a feast. You might share them with the children, who giggle as they try to crack shells with their teeth, or save a handful for the next day's journey to the fields. The seasons dictate everything. Spring brings hope but little food. Summer offers green abundance but demands relentless labor. Autumn is the only time when the table feels heavy. Winter is a long, careful rationing of what came before. You've learned to think in circles, not lines. Meals are not isolated events, but links in an unbroken chain, each depending on the last. Break the chain and survival falters. At night, lying under a rough wool blanket, you listen to the wind outside and think about the stores in the chest, the smoked meat hanging from the rafters, the pit of cabbages in the yard. You know exactly how much you have, how long it might last, and where the gaps will appear if the weather or fate turns against you. Sleep comes slowly, carrying the knowledge that hunger is never gone. It's only ever waiting. By late winter, the meals have grown smaller, and you've learned to stretch the flavor of a single piece of meat across a week. The smoked pork hanging in the rafters is sliced thin as a shadow, shaved into the pottage so that its essence seeps into every ladle, without disappearing all at once. Each strip is a promise you try to keep until the thaw, when the first greens dare to push through the soil. You know the rhythm of the year by the taste of your food. In December, the bread is still made with pure grain. By February, it's cut with more chaff and ground peas to make the flour last. You can feel the difference between a loaf baked in plenty and a loaf baked in worry. Your jaw works harder, your teeth scrape against the coarse grind, but you keep chewing because hunger makes even the roughest bread taste like a blessing. The kitchen garden is silent now, its beds hard under frost. The leeks left in the ground wait patiently under their green spears, safe until you pull them up for a broth. Dried beans hang in bunches near the hearth, rattling softly whenever someone brushes past. They will soften again in the pot, swelling slowly in the warmth, turning the water cloudy and rich enough to keep you standing another day. Once in a while, fortune brings something unexpected, a rabbit from a snare, a brace of pigeons, a gift of cheese from a cousin in the next village. These moments brighten the table like sunlight through a narrow window. The rabbit might be stewed with onions until the meat slips easily from the bone, its thin gravy soaked into bread to make the meal stretch. You savor every bite knowing such luck is rare and won't come again soon. You've heard tales of the nobility feasting on roasted swan, sugar-dusted pastries, and wines from far-off lands. But these are not your realities. Your feast is a loaf that's still warm from the oven, a pot of pottage with more meat than water, or a jug of ale brewed strong enough to bring color to your cheeks. What matters most is not luxury, but the absence of fear, knowing the chest of grain is not yet empty, the larder still has something worth eating, and the neighbors are not whispering of famine. By now, the children have grown used to the same meals day after day. They no longer complain at the sight of barley stew or boiled roots. They know that variety is for other people in other places. Still on feast days, you find a way to surprise them, a small honey cake baked in the ashes, an apple saved from autumn wrapped in straw to keep it from spoiling. The sweetness lingers long after the last bite, a reminder that even in scarcity, small joys can be made. Night closes in early during these months, and the family gathers close to the hearth. The pot rests over the embers, tomorrow's breakfast already in the making. The air smells faintly of smoke, dried herbs, and the lingering scent of tonight's meal. You sit back, hands wrapped around a wooden cup, and let the heat soak into your bones. Hunger may never leave entirely, but for now it is quiet. When the thaw finally comes, it doesn't arrive with a banquet. It comes as a slow, muddy surrender of the frost and the first shy signs of green in the hedgerows. You step outside one morning to find the earth softer underfoot, the air carrying a damp smell of waking soil. This is when you start the hungry work of gathering what spring allows. Nettles are the first to appear, bright and stinging. You harvest them with care, pinching the tops where the leaves are youngest, knowing that in the pot, their bite will mellow into something almost tender. Sorrel follows sour enough to make the tongue wake up after a long winter of blandness. These early greens are more than food. They're a promise that the seasons are still turning, that your hands will hold abundance again, even if only for a few months. Your pottage changes too. The heavy root vegetables give way to these new shoots, turning the broth a greener shade. You might crush a few wild garlic leaves into the pot, their scent cutting through the steam like sunlight in a dim room. Every fresh leaf feels like a bargain you've struck with the land. Here is my labor, here is your gift in return. The garden demands your attention now. You work the soil, still cool and clumpy, to plant peas, beans, and leeks for the months ahead. Your back aches from bending your palms, sting from gripping the hoe, but the sight of neat rows makes the work feel like prayer. You plant not for variety, variety is a dream, but for certainty. The same crops year after year, because you know they will grow, and you know how to keep them alive. Market days return with the warmer weather, and you make the walk with whatever you can spare: eggs from the hens, a basket of leeks, a small wheel of cheese if the cow's milk has been generous. In return, you might bring home a measure of barley, a clay pot of honey, for if luck and coins align, a handful of dried figs from lands you've never seen. They'll be saved for a feast day, each bite stretched into something worth remembering. Evenings in spring are a little lighter, both in the sky and on the table. You sit outside sometimes, the pottage simmering nearby, and crack the first hazelnuts from the year before. The children chase each other between the rows of the garden, and their laughter feels like a feast in itself. Hunger still lives here, it always will, but in these weeks it feels less like a master and more like a familiar companion you've learned to keep at arm's length. By early summer, the garden is no longer a quiet promise, it's a demanding child shouting for your attention in every row. The beans climb faster than you remember. Peas hang in pods that you must pick before they go tough, and the cabbages swell into tight, pale heads beneath their outer leaves. The air is warm, full of the hum of insects and the smell of green things baking in the sun. Summer meals are fresher, though not necessarily richer. The pottage becomes lighter, often just barley with chopped leeks and a scattering of peas, its color a softer green than the deep winter broth. You eat bread still, of course, but now you might set a bowl of curds beside it, milk strained and left to sour into something soft and spreadable. If the cow has been generous, there's enough for butter, pale and flecked with bits of grass from the churn. But butter is too precious to eat daily. You keep most of it for trading or for feast days when the village gathers. The work is heavier in these months than at any other time. You rise before the sun to weed the garden, repair the bean poles, carry water from the well, and tend to the hay in the meadows. Your body runs on whatever you can grab quickly, sometimes a piece of rye bread dunked in ale before heading out. Other times a cold onion eaten in the field with a hunk of cheese. The midday meal might be a cold pottage left from the night before, eaten with your hands because there's no time to fetch spoons. There are moments of sweetness, too. Blackberries begin to ripen at the edges of the lanes, staining your fingers dark. Gooseberries hang tart and firm in the hedges, and if you find a patch of wild strawberries in the woods, you eat them on the spot. The taste so vivid it feels almost like a memory from childhood. But these are stolen luxuries gathered while walking between tasks not served in bowls at the table. The Lord's fields demand as much from you as your own garden. You spend days bent over in the sun, pulling weeds from the grain He will later tax you for, and evenings sore enough to make lying down an ache of its own. At times you barter your labor for food, a sack of oats for a week's work, or a skin of salted herring, if the steward feels generous. It's not charity. It's another kind of currency, as common as coins in the life of a peasant. Summer is also the season when ale is at its most welcome. The heat makes the water turn foul more quickly, and so you keep the brewing pots working almost constantly. The drink is weaker than the monastery's strong brews, but it quenches thirst and keeps fever away. On the warmest nights, you drink it cool from a wooden cup, the taste of malt and yeast, reminding you of the grain you've yet to harvest. As the longest days stretch into the heart of summer, you know this is the narrow window when the land is most generous and also most demanding. Every meal you eat now is earned in sweat, but it's also a meal you can take without the gnawing fear that it's the last of its kind for the year. You can almost forget for a moment that winter is always waiting. By late summer, the world around you hums with a restless energy, fields thick with grain bending under their own weight, orchards heavy with fruit, bees dragging their golden burdens home. This is the moment you've been working toward for months, the point in the year when the table can briefly pretend to be generous. But even now, the abundance is not for lingering. It is for gathering, preserving, and preparing for the thin months ahead. You wake before sunrise because the harvest waits for no one. The first light catches the pale heads of barley and wheat, making them glow like they've been spun from copper. You grip the sickle until your fingers ache, cutting stalk after stalk, the sound of the blade slicing through stems as steady as a heartbeat. Grain is the foundation of every meal. You know bread, pottage, ale, and losing any of it to weather or birds would be like losing a limb. Meals during harvest are stolen moments. In the field, you chew on bread so hard, you must soften it in ale or take a cold onion from your pouch and bite into it raw, the sharpness making your eyes water as much as the wind. Sometimes you're lucky enough to share a hunk of cheese, its salt, a welcome sting on your tongue. You eat quickly, never far from the work, because every hour matters when the sky can turn against you without warning. As the sheaves are gathered, the air begins to smell of the threshing floor dust and chaff rising in a soft haze as you beat the grain from the stalks. The rhythm is almost hypnotic, the flails striking in time, each blow separating the food from what the animals will eat. You'll keep a portion of this grain for your family, but the Lord's share comes first. The mill will claim more, the bakehouse will take its cut, and only what remains will truly be yours. Fruit ripens alongside the grain. Apples are picked and laid in straw-lined pits, some destined for cider, others to be eaten fresh before they soften. Pears are rarer, sweeter, the kind of fruit you eat slowly, because you don't know when you'll have one again. Plums might be dried in the low heat of the hearth, their sugars concentrating into something that will brighten a winter meal. Even the smallest berries are worth gathering, mashed into jams or steeped into syrups that can soothe a winter cough. Preservation is the true work of late summer. You salt meat until your hands crack your fingertips white and sore. You hang strips of fish near the smoke, the air filling with a scent that will cling to your hair and clothes for days. Cabbages are buried in pits with straw, onions are braided into long ropes, and hung from the beams, garlic bound in bunches. Nothing is left to chance. Every item is stored in a way that might give it the best chance of lasting through the cold. Sometimes when the day's labor stretches past sunset, there is a rare quiet moment when you sit at the edge of the field with a piece of new bread still warm from the oven. The crust is crisp, the inside soft, the flour fresh from the mill. You eat it slowly, savoring the taste of the year's work before it becomes just another stored staple. In that moment, the bread is not survival, it is reward. But even in this brief window of plenty, you are haunted by the knowledge that winter will come again. You do not eat freely even now. You measure every loaf, every apple, every jar of pickled beans against the months to come. The land is generous for a season, but you have lived long enough to know that generosity can turn to hunger in the space of one bad month. When the day ends, you return home with the dust of the fields still clinging to your skin, your muscles aching, and your mind already on tomorrow's work. The pottage on the hearth tastes of fresh leeks and barley richer than it's been in months, but you still leave some in the pot for morning. Even in times of plenty, you've learned never to empty it completely. The pot, like your life, must always have something left for the next day. As summer begins to fold into early autumn, the fields are no longer just alive with grain, they're alive with urgency. The harvest is at its peak, and every hand in the village is working from dawn until the light fails. The air is filled with the rustle of drying stalks, the creak of cartwheels, and the occasional call of a steward directing labor. Every sheaf tied, every sack loaded, is another breath of life banked for the winter to come. This is the season when the world smells of ripeness. The orchards are heavy with apples, some already sweet enough to eat fresh, others better suited for pressing into cider. The pressing itself is a slow, deliberate process, fruit gathered and washed, then crushed under a wooden beam that groans like an old ox, the golden liquid trickling into barrels. A cask of cider in the corner of your cottage will be a gift to your winter self, a rare taste of summer in the dark months. Bread is richer now, made from freshly ground grain that hasn't yet had time to grow stale or dusty. You notice the difference in its texture, lighter, easier to chew, the sour tang of rye mellowed by freshness. This is bread worth eating warm, torn apart in large pieces, though still not without thought for tomorrow. Even in abundance, a peasant's table is guided by caution. Vegetables are gathered in such quantities now that the work of preserving them rivals the harvest of grain. Cabbages are layered in pits with straw to keep them crisp, carrots and parsnips buried in sand-filled barrels, onions braided into thick ropes that swing gently in the rafters. You pickle beans in brine, their green fading, but their bite preserved. The air in the cottage smells sharply of vinegar and smoke, the scent of labor turned into security. Meat, when it comes now, is often from animals that could not be kept through winter. A cull of chickens means a brief feast of roasted bird, the skin crisped over an open flame, followed by broth from the bones and scraps that will flavor pottage for days. Sometimes a neighbor trades you a rabbit or a brace of pigeons, and these are cooked quickly. Meat doesn't last long without salt or smoke, and you dare not waste even a mouthful. The workdays blur together, mornings in the fields, afternoons in the garden, or orchard evenings over the hearth, preparing food for storage. You fall asleep with the scent of earth and grain in your hair, your hands stained from berries, your arms aching from lifting and hauling. But there is a quiet satisfaction in it too. This is the season when your labor becomes visible, tangible, stacked in sacks and barrels hanging from hooks and beams. Even so, you never let yourself forget the truth. Every peasant knows one storm, one rot, one infestation can undo an entire season. The weather has its own kind of hunger, and it takes without asking. That knowledge is why even now, when your table feels almost full, you still tuck away a little more, still eat sparingly, still plan for the worst. Because you've seen years when the worst comes, and you've learned that the best way to greet it is with something, anything, left in the pot. By the time autumn deepens, the landscape shifts from the gold of grain to the russet and brown of fallen leaves, and the work turns from gathering to guarding. The great rush of harvest is behind you, but now comes the careful storing, the mending of bins and barrels, the patching of thatched roofs to keep the damp from creeping into your hard-won stores. The village smells of drying herbs, wood smoke, and the sharp tang of fermenting cider. You start the mornings in the cool half-light, checking every sack of grain for dampness or signs of gnawing. Mice are relentless this time of year, slipping in under doors or between loose boards, finding their way to the barley and rye, as if guided by some invisible thread. A single mouse can ruin more than it eats, scattering droppings and bringing sickness. So you set traps, plug gaps with wadded cloth, and post the cat like a sentry. Every grain is worth more now than in the days of abundance. Bread is still on your table every day, but its recipe is shifting with the season. You've begun to mix in more peas and beans to make the flour stretch, a change you can feel in the denser texture and the faint earthy taste. It's a reminder that the generosity of late summer is slipping away, that the months ahead will be about rationing rather than relishing. Still, fresh bread from the oven, its crust cracking as it cools, is enough to draw the whole household to the table. The garden is in its last gasp. You pull the final carrots from the soil, their sweetness a surprise after months of starchy roots. The leeks are sturdy enough to stand in the ground. Through the first frosts, their green spears defying the cold, ready to be cut when the pottage needs something fresh. A few herbs still linger, sage, thyme, and rosemary, tougher than the softer greens that withered weeks ago. These will season meat or stew in the depths of winter, their fragrance a small reminder of warmer days. Preservation work continues in a quieter rhythm now. The cabbages buried in pits are checked for rot, and if one is spoiling you, pull it out before it can infect the rest. Apples are turned in their straw nests, inspected for bruises, the good ones set aside for eating, and the damaged ones pressed into juice or cooked into a thick, spiced paste that will keep for months. What can't be eaten fresh is transformed into something the cold cannot ruin, pickled, smoked, dried. This is also the season of butchering for those who keep animals. Chickens too old to lay are killed, plucked, and stewed the same day. A pig, if you are fortunate enough to have one, is slaughtered with the help of neighbors. Nothing is wasted. Meat, salted fat, rendered into lard, intestines cleaned for sausage casings. Even the blood thickened into pudding. The smell of boiling pork fat clings to the air for days, a heavy, rich scent that makes you hungry, even as it turns your stomach from its strength. Evenings grow longer now, the dark settling earlier each day. The hearth becomes the heart of the home, the pot of pottage simmering low, releasing the scent of barley onion, and maybe a hint of the smoked pork you tucked away last month. You sit close to the fire, mending tools or patching worn clothes, while the children crack nuts or string dried apples on twine. Outside, the wind rattles the bare branches, and you are grateful for the roof over your head, the food under it, and the fact that for now there is enough. But enough is a word you measure carefully. Every portion you eat is counted against the winter's length. Every spoonful of grain removed from the chest is a mark you tally in your head. The calendar is a circle, but winter is the longest arc, and you know that a miscalculation now will be paid for in hunger later. So you keep the meals simple, the servings modest, and the stores guarded like treasure. Even in this caution, there are moments of warmth. On the Feast of All Saints, the village gathers in the Lord's Hall, or in the largest cottage, sharing what each can spare, a loaf, a slab of cheese, a jar of honey. For one night the table is heavy with food, the air filled with laughter, the ale flowing as freely as the stories. You eat until your stomach is full, not just content, and for a while the cold outside feels very far away. Yet as you walk home through the dark, the frost already crisping on the grass, you know that the weeks ahead will test the careful work of the past months. Hunger is not gone. It is only pacing at the edges, waiting for the chance to slip in. And so you bank the fire, check the door latch, and lie down with the comfort of knowing that at least tonight the pot still has something left for morning. By midwinter, the days have shrunk so small they feel like an afterthought, the sun making only a brief, pale appearance before slipping away again. The cold presses into every seam of the cottage, and the stores you once guarded so fiercely are now your daily lifeline. Each morning begins with the same ritual, lifting the lid from the grain chest, running your hand through what remains, and silently calculating how long it will last. You don't just measure in weeks anymore, you measure in ladles of pottage, in slices of bread, in the number of times you can scrape the bottom of the pot before the sound changes. The pottage is at its most austere now. Gone are the handfuls of fresh greens or the sweetness of carrots. What you ladle into bowls is thick with barley-softened onions and the occasional strip of smoked pork, or the end of a sausage cut into coins so thin you can almost see through them. The broth is heavy with the taste of smoke and salt, a reminder of the preservation work you did months ago. You eat slowly, not because you're full, but because you want the warmth to last as long as possible. Bread has changed too. The loaves are darker, made with more chaff and ground peas than pure grain. They are heavier in the hand, rougher on the tongue, but they fill the space in your belly, and that is what matters. On some days when the stores are running low, you cut the bread into thinner slices and soak them in the broth, making it seem like you've eaten more than you have. Winter work is different from the labor of other seasons. There are no fields to tend, no harvest to bring in. Instead, your time is spent repairing tools, mending clothes, and tending to the animals that remain. You bring the hens into a sheltered corner of the yard, feed them from the stores of grain, and hope they'll keep laying at least a few eggs through the cold months. If you're lucky enough to have a cow or goat, their milk, though less than in summer, can be turned into butter or cheese, both rare luxuries now. The garden lies dormant under its blanket of frost, but some crops can still be coaxed from the earth. Leeks stand stubborn in the frozen soil, their green tops a splash of life in a landscape of gray and white. You cut them when needed, slicing them into the pottage for flavor and strength. In the pit outside, cabbages still wait under layers of straw, their outer leaves wilted, but their hearts still crisp and pale. Digging one out is an act of hope as much as necessity proof that your planning in autumn was worth the labor. Evenings are long and dark, the wind rattling at the shutters like a beggar at the door. The family gathers close to the fire, the only light coming from the flames, and a tallow candle set in a simple holder. While the pottage simmers low, you crack hazelnuts gathered last autumn, passing them around as a rare treat. Children play quietly in the corner, stringing dried apple slices onto cord to hang near the hearth. These are the moments when the home feels less like a place of scarcity and more like a fortress against the hunger outside. But hunger is never far. You hear it in the stories passed between neighbors, someone whose stores were spoiled by damp, another whose last chicken was taken by a fox. You know that if your own stores fail, you will be telling a similar story before long. That is why you keep an eye on every sack, every hanging braid of onions, every salted side of pork. In the depths of winter, vigilance is as important as food itself. On feast days, the monotony breaks for a while. A neighbor might share a pie made from preserved meat, or the parish might host a meal with bread, cheese, and ale for everyone. These gatherings are more than just a chance to eat better. They are a reminder that the community survives together, that your fortunes are tied to the fortunes of the people around you. You share what you can because one day you might be the one in need. As the year turns and the first hint of lengthening days appears, you begin to take stock again. You count what remains mark in your mind, how much longer it must last, and start planning the planting for spring. But until then, you continue the winter's careful dance, balancing the pot so it never empties, slicing the bread so it lasts another day, and keeping the hunger outside the door for as long as your stores and your will can manage. You learn that the hardest stretch comes not when winter first tightens its grip, but when it begins to loosen. Late winter slides into the hungry gap with a sly smile, and what felt like survival in December becomes arithmetic in March. The snow withdraws like a tired army, leaving behind rutted lanes and fields the color of old iron. Your grain chest sounds thinner, and the cabbage pit yields hearts that are more memory than meal. You can see the world waking up, and yet your table for a few fierce weeks shrinks smaller than at any other time. You keep the pot alive on stubbornness. Yesterday's pottage is diluted with water, and a handful of barley stirred until the spoon finds a thickness that will pass for comfort. When there is a leak, you slice it as thin as honesty, and let its clean bite talk louder than its size. If you happen on a heel of bacon, you render it to a gloss scrape every whisper of fat into the pot, and fry the rind until it crackles like a joke told too close to hunger. The children lean forward as if smell alone could be a bite. You do not shoo them away. You let them learn the lesson that steam is a promise, and promises are what keep bodies moving. Lent arrives like an official seal on the scarcity you were already observing. The calendar's fasting feels less like a pious choice than an inventory. Meat steps aside, though in truth it was seldom at the table anyway. Fish takes the burden if the river forgives you a catch, or if you can trade for a hard, salt-heavy herring that must be soaked for hours before it agrees to be food again. You whisper herbs into the broth parsley if it's dared to show green thyme rubbed to dust between finger and thumb, because Lent asks for restraint, not despair, and your tongue, like your soul, needs reminding of joy. The church helps in its way. On certain days, the almoner stands near the door, his basket of coarse loaves and small cheeses dolefully generous. You queue without shame. A loaf is a prayer answered in crust. At the abbey, travelers speak of fish ponds, that winter never fully silences of kitchens where the pots are big enough to baptize infants in. You do not begrudge monks their better ale or slower hunger. A full monastery means a village with somewhere to knock when the pot at home turns to boiled hope. You become a scavenger of timetables. The reeve says the plowing will begin as soon as the top inch of soil forgets the freeze, and you go to the field to test it with your heel. The ground resists, then relents, and in that small change you feel a whole year pivot. You eat the last of the stored apples, each one gone a little soft, simmering them into a brown mash and sweetening it with a spoon of last year's honey. The children lick the spoon and pretend it is a feast. You smile because pretending is also a kind of saving. There are days when the body insists on more than the pot can give. Your hands shake while you tie bean poles. Your knees go watery carrying water. You know the tricks. You sop stale bread in hot ale until it swells and gives itself up easily to the teeth. You cut slices so thin you can see light through them, then boast to yourself that thin slices make the loaf last, and the mind stand straighter. You poach an egg, just won the hen's courage, giving you a blessing on a cold, gray morning, and float it like a moon in the bowl, dividing it fairly, and pretending you did not want the whole of it yourself. Neighbors become more visible in the hungry gap drawn outward by necessity and the first air that doesn't bite. You share news the way you share onions carefully trimmed of exaggeration, meant to sustain rather than inflame. A man up the lane lost a sack to damp. Another found weevils and burned half his stores rather than let the rest be tainted. You speak of these things without judgment, because judgment is what the weather does to all of you, and there's no need to duplicate it at the table. The widow, 3 cottages over, has taken to boiling nettles already. You note the patch she favors, and you do not poach it. Friendship is a seasoning that makes thin stew taste like honor. On a lucky day, a snare welcomes you with a rabbit. You feel wealth ripple through the house at the sight of meat that is not a memory. You joint it with reverence, brown the pieces over embers, then let them sink into a shallow broth with onion and a leaf of bay filched last summer from the manor hedge. The bones you keep for a second boiling. The fat you render and save. The skin goes to a neighbor who knows how to tan it into something that keeps wrists warm when the wind remembers winter for one last swipe. And still in small corners, sweetness returns. A hedge yields its first nettle tips bright as new currency. You pick them while talking to your fingers so they do not forget where to hold. At home you crush them with barley flour and a whisper of oil into a green that tastes like a rumor of June. Sorrel unfurls and you pluck it for its lemon truth, letting it shine through a thin soup like a bell through mist. The first wild garlic leaves give you courage. You mince them into everything until the cottage smells like a promise that the world remembers how to be generous. Work which in winter had been a patient keeper becomes restless again. The oxen snort like kettles on the point of boiling, and the plow heaves a brown ribbon behind them. You walk the furrow with a crust in your pocket. Eat it standing chew until sourness becomes steadiness. At noon, you sit on a stone warmed by the merest thought of sun and drink ale that tastes of cellar and virtue. Someone passes a wedge of cheese. You cut it in half and pass the larger piece forward because generosity multiplies when it travels and withers when it stops. In the evenings, you take stock with more than numbers. You open the grain chest and listen truly, listen to the sound of your hand moving through what's left. It has a different music now, less sweep, more scrape. You are not panicked. You are attentive. You rebraid the last of the onions, turn the cabbage in the pit, tap the cider cask, and judge by its voice how many mugs remain. You spread the ledger of the household in your head and run your gaze across it, the way the priest skims scripture seeking guidance, not loopholes. On Sundays after the sermon on fasting and charity, you walk the manor edge and look toward the Warrens with a measured face. You will not poach tonight. You will, however, gather kindling until your arms sting because warmth is a cousin to nourishment, and the two do good work together. Back home, the pot sighs when you lift the lid, an old friend startled from sleep. You tip in a small bowl of pearled barley you promised yourself you would save for a day that needed it, and the broth thanks you by thickening without complaint. Someone always falls ill in the hungry gap. This year, it is the miller's girl scalded by a careless ladle. You send a jar of onion and sage broth because heat and salt and kindness mend faster than scolding. The next morning, a folded cloth appears at your door with a pinch of precious salt inside returned interest on an old kindness or down payment on a future one. You do not ask which. You simply pinch it between finger and thumb and toss a few grains into the pot like a benediction you can taste. And then it happens without ceremony. You are walking the lane with a basket when you see under last year's brittle nettle stems the first brave green of new growth pushing through. It is so small you could miss it if your eyes were the eyes of a person who eats without thinking. Your eyes are peasants' eyes trained to see food at the scale of hope. You kneel, you pinch, you bless with your breath. That night, you eat a bowl that is mostly water and future nettles, sorrel, 2 leaves of wild garlic, a spoon of barley, and you feel in your mouth what your mind has been writing for weeks. The turn is real, the wheel is moving, the calendar is a circle, you are still inside. Sleep comes easier after a bowl like that. The fire burns lower without threatening to vanish. The wind mumbles rather than argues at the shutters, and your stomach, though not full, is convinced. You set the spoon in its corner, the lid on its hook, the loaf back under its cloth. You do not count what remains tonight. You have done enough counting. Tomorrow will bring a new arithmetic with more green in it, and you will sit down at the table with the same honesty as always, ready to measure again, but this time with your thumb pressed a little toward hope. By the time spring properly stretches its limbs, the earth smells of promise, but the memory of winter still lingers in every cautious decision you make at the table. The first tender green shoots are there nettles, sorrel, wild garlic, but you've learned not to snatch them all at once. You take only enough to flavor a pot, to color a bowl, because you know how quickly the hungry gap can return if you spend your good fortune too fast. The garden demands your hands before your stomach. You turn the soil that's been sleeping for months, feeling the frost still hiding in the deeper clods. It's heavy work clinging to the spade, breaking each lump apart, so the seeds will find their way. Peas go in first, then beans, the hardy crops that can shrug off a late frost. You keep a sack of onions from last year's braid and push their sets into the ground in neat rows, imagining them in the broth 6 months from now. Even with new life sprouting, your meals are still anchored by the careful use of what's left from winter. The grain chest is light, so bread is baked less often, each loaf a planned event. You make more oat cakes now, cooking them on the griddle over the fire, thinner, quicker to prepare, and easier to portion out over several days. Pottage remains your constant, but it's fresher now, flecked with chopped herbs and the first greens, no longer the deep, smoky brown of winter fare. The hens begin laying more regularly, with the lengthening days, and an egg on the table feels like a victory. You might boil it and split it in half to share, or whisk it into the hot broth to thicken it into something more nourishing. On rare days, there's milk enough for a soft cheese pressed in a cloth and eaten fresh with coarse bread. The taste is so bright compared to winter's food that you find yourself closing your eyes at the first bite. You venture further afield to forage, learning the secret places where edible leaves grow before others notice. The hedgerows yield tender shoots, and the woodland floor offers mushrooms if the rains have been kind. Every find is weighed carefully in your mind, how much to use today, how much to dry or pickle for another season. Preservation is still your shadow companion, even when the world around you is greening. Market days return with more variety. Traders bring salted fish, early vegetables from warmer regions, even a few dried fruits. You walk among the stalls, weighing your coins in your palm, before deciding what small luxuries to take home. Sometimes it's a measure of barley to fill the grain chest, other times a twist of salt or a lump of honeycomb to sweeten the children's mouths after so many months of sameness. By evening, the cottage smells of change, fresh herbs, green vegetables, bread just pulled from the griddle. You eat with more light in the room, the sun lingering longer over the village. Yet even in this gentle abundance, you measure every portion, every handful, every seed planted, because you know the wheel turns, and though today feels generous, the cycle will bring scarcity again. Survival isn't just about eating what's in front of you, it's about ensuring that when the next winter comes, the pot will still have something left to give. By early summer, the memory of the hungry gap is still close enough to sharpen every decision you make, even as the land begins to overflow again. The days are long now, and the sun rises early, spilling light into your cottage before you've even stirred the embers. That extra light means extra work, and food becomes both the fuel for your labor and the reward at the end of it. The garden is in full voice, and you tend it like a living pantry. Broad beans hang heavy in their pods. Peas bulge against the green leeks, stand tall and proud, and the first cucumbers hide under their fauves. You weed water and tie the beans higher, knowing that every small act now is a meal in a few days or weeks. You pull the first small carrots, thin, bright, and so sweet, you almost want to eat them raw on the spot, but you save them for the pot, because habit is stronger than impulse. Meals in these weeks are brighter, more colorful, and the pot over the fire carries the green scent of summer. Pottage now is fresh barley simmered with peas and young carrots, the broth kissed with herbs from the garden, parsley, mint, maybe a sprig of thyme. Bread is still a constant, but it's lighter now, made with grain milled from the first threshing of the year. Sometimes, if the hens have been generous, you crack an egg into the broth, just before serving, letting the heat swirl it into golden threads. Summer also brings the small luxuries that have been missing for months. You find time to make soft cheese again, draining curds in a cloth, and pressing them into rounds to eat fresh or salt lightly for keeping. The orchard's early plums are tart but welcome, and you eat them in the shade while the sun beats down on the fields. Even the ale tastes different now, cooler, fresher, with a faint sweetness from the recent malt. Yet summer's abundance doesn't mean rest. The Lord's fields are demanding, and haymaking leaves your arms aching and your throat parched. You carry bread and cheese wrapped in cloth to the meadow, eating under the open sky with the scent of cut grass thick around you. On the hottest days, you trade your midday meal for a longer drink of ale, knowing that thirst can be as dangerous as hunger. The evenings stretch, and you sometimes take supper outside, bread torn by hand, a bowl of pottage steaming in the cooling air, a wedge of cheese and maybe a slice of cucumber fresh from the vine. The children run between the garden rows, and you watch them thinking of the months ahead when their laughter will be muffled by the cold and the dark. But for now, you eat with a little less caution. You let the bread be thickly sliced, the vegetables cut generously into the pot. There is a rhythm here, a short-lived season when the table feels alive and the fear of scarcity loosens its grip. And though you know the wheel will turn again for these weeks, you can sit at your table, feel the weight of the day's labor in your bones, and eat until the bowl is empty without counting how much is left in the chest. By the height of late summer, the days feel endless, and so does the work. The fields ripple with grain, almost ready for cutting, heavy heads bowing in the wind, as if already surrendering to the sickle. Every step outside reminds you that the year's wealth is here now, waiting to be taken and stored and guarded, but also that one storm, one ill-timed rain could ruin the months of labor in a matter of hours. The air is thick with the smell of ripening grain of hay drying in the meadow of earth, warming under the steady sun. In the garden, the abundance borders on overwhelming. Cucumbers hang cool and heavy under broad leaves. Peas and beans swell in their pods, and onions push against the soil, their papery tops bending with the weight. The cabbages are firm, their outer leaves curling into wide, dusty fans. Herbs, sage, thyme, mint crowd the edges of the plot, demanding to be cut before they flower. You move through the rows like a harvester in a private kingdom, but you never take more than you can prepare, knowing that waste now is an insult you'll pay for in winter. Meals at this time of year are the richest they will ever be for a peasant. The pottage gleams with color, carrots, sliced thick peas that burst with sweetness, leeks softened in butter, saved from the morning's churning. Bread is baked more often with flour from freshly milled grain that still smells of the field. Sometimes you indulge in a meal that would be unthinkable in other seasons, bread dipped in milk sprinkled with honey, or thick wedges of cheese eaten without counting how many days it must last. For a few short weeks you eat because you cannot, just because you must. But abundance is work. The day is divided between the garden, the Lord's fields, the orchard, and the cottage where food must be salted, smoked, dried, or stored before it spoils. Strings of onions and garlic hang from the rafters, their scent mingling with the richer, smokier aroma of fish drying near the hearth. Apples are pressed into cider, the rhythmic turning of the press, accompanied by the drip of golden juice into barrels. In the cool corner of the cottage, crocks fill with beans in brine and pickled cabbage that will carry you through the months when the ground is hard and bare. You still carry food with you to the fields, bread and cheese wrapped in a cloth, a jug of ale to drink when the heat becomes too much. Sometimes in the middle of work, a neighbor will pass by with a handful of fresh berries or a slice of cucumber, and you'll trade them for a wedge of cheese or a hunk of bread. These small exchanges keep the taste of variety alive, even when the work is relentless. Evenings, though, belong to the harvest's quieter side. The light lingers and supper can be eaten outside, thick slices of bread, fresh pottage, maybe roasted beans tossed with oil and herbs. The children run between the trees, chasing the shadows of the leaves, while you and the others talk about the weather, the coming threshing, the hope that this year's yield will be enough to keep hunger small when the cold returns. Yet in the back of your mind, the truth remains, the wheel will turn, and the table will grow smaller again. The key now is to work without wasting, to store without hoarding, to eat enough to keep your strength, without letting the taste of plenty make you careless. For now, the table is full, the pot is rich, and the bread is fresh. You hold on to these days like you would hold on to the warmth of the fire in winter, knowing they will fade, but letting them fill you while they last. By the time autumn begins to bow its head toward winter again, the cycle has come full circle. The days shorten, the air sharpens, and you can feel the weight of the year's work stored in every sack barrel and hanging braid in the cottage. The grain chest is full now, not heavy with waste, but packed tight with purpose, rye barley and oats ready to be ground into the bread that will see you through the months ahead. The vegetables lie in their pits and bins like treasure, under careful guard, each cabbage heart and carrot root another coin in the currency of survival. You move through these final mild days with a quiet urgency, tying up loose ends before the frost closes its hand. The garden's last gifts are gathered leeks pulled in long green spears, the last beans shelled and dried, the final onions trimmed and hung. The orchard is stripped bare, its branches clattering in the wind, but the scent of apples still lingers in the storehouse, mingling with the tang of cider in the casks. Meals at this moment are a strange balance, still rich enough to feel like summer hasn't entirely gone, but already rationed with an eye toward the long dark ahead. The pottage is thick with late carrots and cabbage still brightened with herbs that will soon disappear from the garden. Bread is made more often baked in the communal oven, where neighbors stand shoulder to shoulder, marking loaves with the cuts that claim them. Sometimes a feast slips in before the cold roast goose if someone can spare it, stewed rabbit from a last successful snare, fresh cheese from milk that will soon slow to a trickle. In the evenings, the hearth becomes the center of everything again. The fire's glow deepens as the light fades earlier each day, and you find yourself staring into it, as if the flames could burn the image of summer's green into your memory. You sit with the bowl in your hands, steam curling into your face, and think about how each spoonful is the result of hundreds of small acts: planting, weeding, cutting, storing, guarding. You've lived the whole year on a knife edge between enough and not enough. You've known the heaviness of the hungry gap and the brief, dizzy fullness of harvest. Now, as winter's shadow stretches over the village, again you understand what it means to be ready. Not because you're certain you have all you need, but because you've done everything that could be done. Tomorrow frost will come to the lane. The pot will be filled again and again, each time a little differently, but always with the same purpose. The bread will be sliced thinner, the meat rarer, the greens just a memory. But tonight, you eat in the last days before the long dark tasting, both the work behind you and the challenges ahead, and you know that this is what it means to be a peasant, to live by the turning of the seasons, to endure the lean times, and to savor the rare moments when the table feels truly full. And now, as the fire in the hearth softens to a gentle glow, the night wraps itself around the cottage like a thick woolen cloak. The air is still save for the faint sigh of embers and the occasional pop of settling wood. You've eaten your fill for this evening, not to bursting, but enough to let your body know it will see the morning, and the bowl sits empty by your side, the last wisp of steam fading into the quiet. The grain chest is closed, the bread wrapped and stored, the pot resting on its hook above the coals. Everything feels in its place, the work of the day tucked away as neatly as the food you've saved for tomorrow. Beyond the shuttered window, the lane lies silent, the fields sleeping under the cool weight of the night. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl calls once and then again, as though keeping watch. You settle back on the bench, letting the warmth seep into your bones. Your mind drifts through the seasons you've walked in this, telling the bitter hunger of the gap, the cautious joy of spring greens, the labor-heavy wealth of summer, the golden rush of harvest, the measured pace of winter. Each turn of the year has brought its share of hunger and its share of hope, and in this moment they feel balanced, as if the wheel of life itself is holding still just long enough for you to rest. The candlelight dances across the walls, your eyes grow heavier, and the sounds of the cottage blend into the soft hum of sleep. Tomorrow will come with work and weather and the endless tending to survival. But for tonight, you are warm, you are fed, and you are still.